Ever since the very day we learned that Monolith Soft's mysterious Project X for Wii U was going to be renamed Xenoblade Chronicles X, arguments pitting each Xenoblade game against each other have been happening, and they will continue to happen until the end of time. Despite that though, if I were to poll every single Xenoblade fan out there, I think at least two things would be approaching consensus. One, we like Shulk, and two, we like Future Redeemed. But what about how Shulk was done in Future Redeemed? Because I think there's a decent argument that could be made that he kinda got the short end of the stick, compared to not just his counterpart from Xenoblade 2, but also his own game's representation. In order to do that though, this video will contain spoilers for the entire numbered Xenoblade Chronicles trilogy. Let's go! First time I've had to say that since XDE came out, and yes, it is like riding a bike. You don't lose the muscle memory for saying things like that. Before I delve any deeper, what I want to make very clear is that I'm specifically talking about Shulk and only Shulk, and nothing else about Xenoblade 1's representation or fan service in Future Redeemed. I have an entire video where I talk about how all of that is good, how it gives an appropriate send-off to the Klaus trilogy by making things go full circle in a lot of places, and how it does a very good job of balancing out the heavy Xenoblade 2 skew of fan service in the base game and first two waves of DLC. It's just Shulk's portrayal I want to interrogate here, and that Xenoblade 1 fans I haven't heard from might have issues with, and I don't know, so if you do, comment that. Also like, subscribe, and all that stuff, even if you aren't a big Xenoblade 1 superfan who's disappointed by Shulk and Future Redeemed. I like engagement and want to hit 40,000 subscribers this year, and I don't know if I'll have a new game announcement to piggyback off of to do that. Also, I'm not really taking gameplay into account here. Yeah, it is pretty unfortunate that they did the cool thing and gave him the Dunban playstyle, but he's so much worse at it than Dunban ever was. But this video is about whether or not Shulk was written to be washed unnecessarily, and yeah, if he is, then him not being effective in battle is some accidental story and gameplay integration, but I don't think the people designing the battle system took a look at the script, saw how potential manned he was going to get, and then made his entire family line ineffective as a result. But yeah, I said he was potential man before, and that is mostly a joke. We might be doing a bit of Shulk slander here, but that's not really the right thing to call him when he already was the protagonist of his own game beforehand. So potential man doesn't really work when he already hit his potential in a game that released 16 years ago and has just fallen off tremendously since then. My main guideline for the video is the tweet I made a month ago that got me interested in making a video about this in the first place. I'm going to do reverse psychology here. Don't follow me on Twitter. Most of my other posts are nowhere near as good as this one. And yeah, we're just gonna go through all of these bullet points except the gameplay one that I already addressed. Or rather, we're gonna go over the first two first. The last time we saw him, Shulk's job was weapons developer, and he clearly is a skilled engineer and inventor capable of creating a whole bunch of different gadgets. In fact, in Future Redeemed, the ether slides also seem to be something of his own design. And yet, unless he's actively on screen, he doesn't seem to ever make any use of that skill. I think, in spite of the major Melia focus in Future Connected, Shulk did get another very important capstone character moment in designing the Monado Rex Plus, as only his innovation was capable of creating a weapon that could hurt the Fog King. He basically invented not only the Hilbert effect from Xenosaga, but also a version of Monado Enchant that would work on the new enemy this new united world would be facing. I think that's about the best thing they could possibly do for his character in a short-length sequel to Xenoblade 1, where he's not the main focus. But just because making the Rex Plus is a major character moment for him doesn't mean he should just hold on to it for all eternity. By my estimation, at least 15, and quite possibly more than even 20, years have passed between Future Connected and the intersection that starts Ionios. So when Shulk shows up in Ionios, why is he using a weapon from 2 decades ago? Melia having the Rex Plus in her room, that I completely understand. That's probably a memento of the last time she was able to be completely free and go on an adventure with her friends before she was stuck doing administrative stuff as the Emperor for probably the rest of her life. Now, I'm not saying it's weird that there's 2 Rex Pluses. It's possible that they were either limited or mass-produced after Future Connected, or when Shulk was made an Ionios avatar, he just showed up with gear already and the Rex Plus happened to be what he manifested with, suggesting that maybe that's the weapon he was currently using when the intersection happened, or Origin itself has a sense of nostalgia and just manifested him with the last weapon we saw him with. There could be an in-universe reason for all of that, but we also know that Shulk and Rex have been within Ionios for at least a year by the time Future Redeemed happens. I know the Liberators are short-staffed and don't have a lot of resources, but 20 years, and I'm honestly inclined to lean closer to 25, have passed in the real world before any of this went down. It would be absurd if replica Monado technology hadn't advanced past the time of Future Redeemed, and that even with those limited resources, Shulk wasn't capable of making a much, much better weapon than the one he was using as a 19-year-old. You could just say, okay, the Rex Plus in Future Redeemed is a much better weapon. It just looks like the original for nostalgia purposes. Alright, why would Shulk deliberately make his weapon look like an old weapon for nostalgia purposes when the entire point of him being a liberator is pushing the next generation to make a future for themselves and not hide stagnating in nostalgia? So from this perspective, the only real ways to look at it are either A, Shulk is incapable of making a weapon better than one he upgraded almost literally in a cave with a box of scraps 20 years ago, or B, Shulk is feeding into the Mobius thought because he's too nostalgia poisoned to use a weapon other than the first Monado he fully made on his own, even though it has to be extremely obsolete by now, and he himself has almost certainly designed much more powerful iterations in the long time since we last saw him in Future Connected. The slander from this can be lessened a bit because Rex is already using the Firelight Swords during the confrontation with Alpha in the opening cutscene, so that's quite possibly before the Liberators were as built up and before Shulk even met Riku. Also, he wasn't injured then, so I think it is very, very likely that Shulk was the one who created Rex's Firelight Swords, but it's kind of weird. The Firelight Swords are capable of combining into a replica of Numa's sword, so yeah, that basically is a combining dual replica Monado set he designed from scratch, but didn't think to do anything for himself. And before you turn the nostalgic weapon thing I said before against me, the Firelight Swords are specifically supposed to be Pyra and Mithra's Aegis swords, so they don't just represent nostalgic weapons Rex used in the past, they represent two of the people he's closest to in the world. And given how Xenoblade 2 does reference core chips in a cutscene, those are also canon, and the Aegis swords are some of the only weapons in the game that don't change appearance with a different core chip, so as long as Pyra and Mithra still functioned as blades after the end of Xenoblade 2, and Rex was fighting as their driver, the weapons he'd be using would just look the same for his entire life. And I think Nia's constructs being of the Aegis swords as they appeared in Xenoblade 2 is a pretty big indication that that is indeed the case, because I don't think Nia would create constructs of the swords as they were back during Xenoblade 2 if they changed appearance at all in the intervening time. Oh, and by the way, Shulk has an engineering accomplishment off-screen prior to Future Connected even. Shulk seems to be the inventor of what eventually turned into the Kavesi power frames in Ionios, but he's already wearing those on his Future Connected outfit. We don't even get to see him do that. And then there's the whole Origin matter. I've always operated under the assumption, since the base game of 3 came out, that as depicted, Tora did make the Agnes side of Origin, but Shulk was in charge of the Keves side, just because, you know, he's the best engineer we know of in that universe. But if you examine some dialogue in Future Redeemed closely enough, it doesn't seem to be the case. It seems like he knew the details of the project and what Origin was supposed to do, but not actually how it worked, which is extra baffling because it's based on the Ontos core. The same Ontos that gave him power back during Xenoblade 1. The same Ontos core that he is depicted discovering in a flashback. Now, to Shulk's credit, A does say that the whole Origin Ontos architecture thing would be self-evident to Shulk, but the way he responds isn't, yes, I understand that because I helped make it. It's, I heard about that from Melia, a gift from Alvis, she called it. Which is an amazing trailer line, but makes absolutely no sense if you think Shulk actually worked on Origin himself. He doesn't even live up to the charitable assumption A made of him. A assumed that because Shulk is familiar with Origin's function and was inside it to face Alpha, he would be aware of the structure because of that. Shulk's response isn't any of that stuff, it's, Melia told me. Not because I worked on it, not because I've been through it, not because I'm smart enough to be able to figure things out. Melia told me. Meaning that unless the flashback of Shulk picking up the Ontos core was purely metaphorical, which I think would be a crazy move for them to go back to the Xenoblade DE models to make a minor cutscene specifically for something that didn't even really happen. Or Shulk's entire contribution to the Origin project was, by chance, finding the Ontos core, presumably giving it to Melia and her government for safekeeping, and then maybe acting in an advisory role that was so hands-off he didn't even know the base technology they were using to make it. Riku was obviously taught by Shulk, but I can't even say he was involved, and the reason Origin is Ball is because it was a Nopon creation on both sides, because Riku would have told Shulk about this. There's really no way to spin Melia being the one to tell Shulk about all this that makes him look good here. Except, wait a minute, I might have just lied there a bit earlier. We don't know if Riku was taught by Shulk at all. We only see them together in Ionios, where they seem pretty close. They seem like they're confidants, with only Riku keeping some secrets from Shulk that he specifically needs to only tell to the right people at the right time. And they almost co-mentor Nicole at some points. Given the fact that Riku is Ricky's son, and Ricky and Shulk were close enough where Ricky offers to adopt Shulk in a heart-to-heart, yeah, they're almost certainly close outside of Ionios, but we actually don't know if any of Riku's technical aptitude comes from Shulk, or if it just all comes from Melia. Again, someone who we wouldn't expect to know anything about any of this stuff prior to Xenoblade 3. The Melia train ain't stopping there either, because you would think that Shulk was at least involved in the creation of Lucky 7 in some way. That is not true. Lucky 7 was created in Ionios, but presumably before Shulk awoke in it, before Future Redeemed, by Melia, and possibly only by Melia. The official story is that Melia made Lucky 7 and then entrusted it to Riku, but there has to be some grain of truth to the story of the 7 legendary Nopon with the 7 hammers, because those guys are still capable of using Origin Metal to upgrade the party members' blades. So whether or not Melia got their help in creating Lucky 7 to begin with and just simply chose Riku out of those guys to give it to, or if Melia made it all on her own and just simply recruited every Nopon smith that wasn't assimilated into Origin she could find to be part of the cover story, it doesn't matter. At best, Shulk's involvement was teaching Riku before any of this Ionios stuff happened at all, and I don't even know how well a pre-Ionios Shulk's lessons would have prepared him for working with Origin Metal in the first place. Riku's enigmatic master pawn was Melia and not Shulk after all, so clearly, at the very least, whatever she had to teach him superseded anything he could have learned from Shulk beforehand. And then there's the biggest piece of slander possible. Riku has been carrying Lucky 7 with him almost the entire time he's been around Shulk. Do you know what Lucky 7 is made out of? The piece of Origin Metal that Fiora's will and soul crystallized into in the world of Ionios. Shulk, my brother in wave existence, Riku's been carrying your wife around the entire time, and you seemingly didn't notice at all. Now, admittedly, when Riku points out the wrapped up Lucky 7 to Shulk, he does seem to recognize it and, at least know that it's some weapon created by Melia, and he says, "Isn't that?" before getting cut off by Riku continuing to talk. But that doesn't seem to be the kind of reaction he would have if he knew that it was actually Fiora. From this, we can at least grant Shulk that his knowledge of Origin goes as far as knowing that Origin Metal can contain souls, and he seems to understand that Lucky 7 is something made by Melia as a hope for the future of Ionios, but it doesn't seem like he can sense Fiora being in there, and it doesn't seem like he's seen Lucky 7 in person beforehand, so Riku didn't show it to him and tell him that Fiora was inside it at some point prior to this scene. He's also not being helped by Riku still being Riku in this scene. Whatever Melia told Riku to not tell people apparently extended as far as even Shulk, which is somewhat weird because you think she'd be able to trust him more than almost anyone else. But either way, Riku almost seems to deflect from the importance of Lucky 7 to Shulk specifically. He says everyone is here while looking at Lucky 7, and then he turns to look at the Rex Plus and says, "and also with Shulk here." And that's not a mistranslation. As far as I can tell, it's more or less exactly what he says in Japanese as well. So that leads me to believe that not even Riku is actually capable of telling who is in a given Origin Metal shard, and stuff like the Fiora factoid is a bit further on the fluff for the player scale than anything else. And given the fact that Riku mentions Lucky 7 and the Rex Plus in the same breath in the same way, that also seems to indicate to me that he's not being metaphorical with the strength of our friends is giving us resolve to carry on and all that, he is literally referring to people in Origin Metal, which means that Shulk's Future Redeemed Rex Plus, and probably also Rex's Future Redeemed Firelight Swords, do contain Origin Metal themselves as well, but it was probably still Riku who made them that way though, because he is the only person in the Liberators we know knows how to do that. It is also very possible there's some advanced Riku trolling going on in here, but I'm pretty certain if he knew Fiora was in Lucky 7, he would have said something to Shulk a long time ago, where in this case it seems like this is the first time Shulk has even seen it as a wrapped bundle, which, sure, fair enough, Riku doesn't have to show all of his personal possessions to all of his friends, but where is he carrying that? It seems like he carries it around everywhere he goes in case he happens to run into the kind of person Melia told him to entrust it to. So he's actually been carrying an entire katana in hammer space for the entirety of Future Redeemed, and somehow this is the first time Shulk has seen it. But yeah, on this point we can definitely give Shulk the benefit of the doubt, because it doesn't seem like Riku knew the exact identities of any piece of Origin Metal out there, and was just reminding Shulk that everyone they know and love is locked in Origin fighting the good fight on their own, so they aren't truly alone. Also, we can't really single this out as a shortcoming of Shulk, because Rex several times throughout Future Redeemed wishes quote-unquote those two were there, and he wasn't able to sense Pyra and Mithra in Matthew's gauntlets the entire time, the exact same way Shulk couldn't sense Fiora in Lucky 7. The only difference is that when Pyra and Mithra's power manifested, it was visibly shown to us as the Numa Core, and it took a Takahashi statement a year later for us to even learn about the Fiora thing. As an aside, we know Lucky 7 in its fully realized form manifests with Monado arts, so it is probably just an Origin Metal replica Monado, even if it wasn't made by Shulk himself. Interestingly, it's a katana Monado that seems to have been made long before any of its creators met A. It just kinda happened that every Monado-like thing within Ionios, except the ones that were replicas of things that existed prior to it, coincidentally ended up as a curved sword. But either way, I don't just attribute Lucky 7 being designed after a Monado to its Monado-like power. I kind of always figured there's also a little bit of Maneth's effect on Fiora remaining in it. So as a former Monado wielder, not only was Fiora's will strong enough to manifest as a separate piece of Origin Metal, but it also was one that happened to make a good Monado. To add on to this, I do think the first interlink was caused by all three pieces of the Trinity processor actually working in harmony for once. A was there as the Ontos rep, Numa was in Matthew's gauntlets, and we know as a fact Malos was an end sword at the end, so that's all three of them covered. But I am also convinced that an even unknowing convention of Monado wielders also lent power to this. In physical form, we have A, technically also Alpha, I guess, Shulk, Rex, and N counts as a Monado wielder too. In Origin Metal form, we have Pyra and Mithra, Malos, and since Riku is present there, he must have also had Lucky 7 in Hammer Space, so Fiora was there too. That was every single living, proper, not replica, Monado wielder, and one dead one, as of the ends of Xenoblade 1 and 2 present in the same place, with the entire Trinity processor working together. The power of an Ouroboros stone, which was lent to by Nia, and possibly also was made out of Origin Metal containing other previous party members, and in the middle of Origin itself. If any combination of factors is going to manifest in a new spectacular power that can save the day, and eventually seal the fate of Mobius a millennium later, it's gonna be that. Basically what we're getting at is not recognizing Fiora isn't a Shulk-only problem, so we can't really hold that against him. What we can kind of hold against him, though, is the last bullet point from the original tweet. And that is, why is Riku doing all of the actual weapon development in Future Redeemed? Now, I'm not going to hold the physical work against him. Shulk is literally disabled, and his prosthetic arm is not as advanced as you might think it would be in a Xenoblade game given all the mecha around there, as evidenced by the fact that he switched his weapon into his non-dominant hand instead of using his new robot limb to swing it around harder than he ever could before. It's also not fair to hold the design of the prosthetic itself against him. When it had to have been designed, Shulk was not only without a dominant hand he could draw blueprints and stuff with, but also he probably was A, in a lot of pain, and B, focused on recovery and what to do in the aftermath of the Mobius team up not ousting Alpha, so it's completely reasonable that Riku, the other competent engineer in the room, would design something for him. But we have a scene of Shulk directly complaining about certain aspects of Riku's prosthetic. So, if he's recovered enough to be running all around Centomnia, leading the Liberators, making plans, taking hostages, and fighting and all that, he's gotta be in a good enough state where he could have made upgrades to the prosthetic after the fact to fix the issues that he specifically had, and would be able to fix better than communicating to Riku what was wrong. Nicole, upon looking at the arm for the first time, is able to find the issue that both Shulk and Riku couldn't figure out. And that's kind of crazy given what both of those two had accomplished. And I get that they might want to tie your gear upgrades to a specific NPC rather than having a party member do it, even if you initiate the upgrading just by talking to an empty workbench and Riku only shows up there in the menu. But it's pretty much directly stated that Riku is the only one participating in the upgrades besides the gathering of materials. So why wasn't Shulk or even Nicole able to participate in that? It can't just be because Origin Metal, right? Like, yeah, Riku is the only one who knows how to work Origin Metal, and the only hammer they have that can do it is Nappan size, but surely, as long as you know the physical properties of it, you can design with something you don't know how to work. Like, you don't need to be able to reenact the entire Bessemer smelting process in your backyard to get an engineering degree, but people can hire you to design things made out of steel, no problem. The one angle I could see them going with this is, in his older age, Shulk mellowed out a bit, which we can clearly see in his personality in Future Redeemed, and decided to stop being a direct contributor to the military-industrial complex. As the one Future Redeemed era thing we know he designed is for traversal, so it's possible that he knows Riku knows weapons and Origin Metal specifically, so they have him focus on the blades and stuff, while Shulk designs the more specialized stuff that he might be able to have picked up on in his longer life and wider breadth of experience. So he does the traversal things. Maybe Shulk designed the Levnesses the Lost Numbers use. Nicole is pretty clearly the one who designed Gilgamesh because it bears some resemblance to a much larger version of his wing backpack, but it's possible Shulk had some preliminary blueprints kicking around that made it to the second city when that was founded. You can somewhat back this up with Future Redeemed's gem crafting as well. While at camp using the portable ether furnace, 2 of your party members will just randomize to be the ones standing in front of it when you click on the gem craft button, and those characters will have voice lines every time you craft a gem, indicating that they are the ones doing that. However, there's a side quest where Shulk and Nicole work together to fix the damaged ether furnace back in Colony 9, which not only unlocks level 4 and 5 gems for you in general, but also the ability to use that furnace for crafting as well. When you do so, no characters appear in front of it, and there are no voice lines upon a successful craft, but I'm willing to believe that because it's an old model, it's literally the model Shulk used in Xenoblade 1 before getting his own portable furnace back in the day. I'm pretty sure he's the only one who actually knew how to operate it to begin with. Nicole was able to help repair it because he's intelligent to figure out how that stuff works, and then Shulk taught him how to use it. So whenever you use that specific furnace, it is probably the 2 of them working together to make the gems, instead of whatever party members you can actually see on screen. Technically speaking though, all of the video up until this point was just preamble to the depiction of Shulk versus Rex. With Rex, you already learned more about him post-Xenoblade 2 in the base game, and the piece of information you got led to one of the most memorable screenshots in the entire Xenoblade series, causing a whole lot more memes centering on Rex, and a whole lot of people changing their opinion on him just because of something that happened outside of his own game to sometimes problematic results. If you can't understand that the only time you can describe that relationship as a harem and be correct is from Nia's point of view, you don't understand that relationship. Anyway, Rex also gets to be the father of one of the 2 main characters of Xenoblade 3, while I think most people push against the idea of Noah being descended from Shulk. In Future Redeemed, he gets a brand new design where he shoots up in height, is taller than Shulk now, wielding 2 of his previous weapons at once because he's just big and strong enough to do that, and he honestly gets a lot more one-liners in the cool scenes of the old guy's aura farming. He gets to be Giga Chad Uncle Rex, and while Shulk also gets to show up using a fighting style inspired by his mentor, gets to be a mentor for his own child in a way he never really got to do with their previous dynamic in the original world. Shulk just doesn't seem to have aged as well, and doesn't have as sunny and as comparable to his previous appearances outlook on things as Rex does. Yeah, clearly they are both very depressed from the loss of their previous worlds, the Mobius takeover of Origin, and not being around most of their loved ones, but Shulk shows it a whole lot more. And yeah, it's really impressive that the series is even willing to show that level of pain and vulnerability in a returning protagonist in a fan-servicey final chapter that marks the end of a 13-year-long trilogy. When you compare them, Rex is more or less just himself but older. He is the original Rex from Xenoblade 2, but wiser and a bit more melancholic. And then Shulk, although it is absolutely true to his character from the beginning, he is the guy with the pessimism skill tree after all, seems to have taken things a whole lot worse and regressed a little bit in outlook since the last time we saw him. They're both clearly hurting inside, but Rex comes off as this strong, confident, from-the-front, loud leader guy, while Shulk is depressed, tired-looking, hasn't cut his hair in years because he doesn't have Fiora to remind him to do it, and just doesn't seem to have that fire driving him that he had before. In context, "I'm not really feeling it" is a much less funny and much more tragic line. Plus, on top of that, he says that age saps his courage, which, you know what? Completely reasonable line for a mentor character of his age to say. This isn't Auron in Final Fantasy X being 35 years old and acting like he's about to keel over if he gets startled again. This is a shonen protagonist long after aging out of the role, not being able to muster some of the same fire he had in his youth. Shulk is almost certainly in his 40s, probably even pushing 50 by now. Reasonable age for him to start acting like that. But he is 3 years older than Rex, and we know from conversations between Melia and Nia that a year in one world is a year in the other world. And as far as we can see, Shulk and Rex are still about the same physical age, even in these Ionios avatar forms, so he's just taken the years a whole lot worse than Rex had, even though I think it's pretty reasonable to believe they had an equally tumultuous time right up until Ionios happened. So a lot of this only came about since his loss to Alpha. I do think it is worth comparing Rex's to some degree though. You have to remember a lot of time has passed between the photo being taken and the intersection. And that's purely because Mio is a baby in the photo, and you have to assume that her and Noah are about the same age in the separate worlds, so they'll be about the same age when they finally reunite after the end of 3, right? Mio's a year older than Noah in at least 2 of their lives in Ionios, so I think it's reasonable to say she is the same outside of it. That would mean she's about 12 or 13 based on the ages of Noah and the other Kavesi kids in the opening and ending. So Rex, as he appears at the beginning of Future Redeemed, because as far as we know, Shulk and Rex physically manifested in Ionios and then almost immediately went after Alpha, and Future Redeemed takes place several years after that loss. So the Glimmer Rex meets in Future Redeemed is actually older than the one he remembers from real life. If we want to continue the Rex and Shulk parallels, it's pretty reasonable to assume the same is true for Nikal as well. What this means for the timeline of everyone having kids? Well, Shulk is already older than Rex. Rex goes through an entire growth spurt and probably a little bit more before he has any kids, and those are all at the same time. So maybe Nikal was just born later in Shulk and Fiora's marriage for whatever reason. Or, I don't know, maybe Shulk and Fiora had an earlier kid, like maybe Chris or something, and Nikal was actually their second child. That could make sense too. But either way, I think you can really chalk all of this up to Rex was forced to be self-sufficient from a very young age, only really having Gramps to rely on, while Shulk never really had to be, and had a large support network around him the entire time. The time he spent in Ionios is longer than the amount of time Fiora was dead in Xenoblade 1, so this is the longest period of time he's ever been separated from her. And on top of that, Ryan and Dunban have always been watching out for him. He's just kind of been a more high-maintenance person than Rex has from the beginning, so yeah, of course he's going to be affected harder by losing everyone. Really, it just comes down to the roles Shulk and Rex had in their original games. They both develop a lot, but Rex is more defined by how he helps Pyra and Mithra change than by his own development himself, while Shulk is the main focus of Xenoblade 1's narrative, and his development is how a lot of plot twists and turns happen. Plus, while it is clear that Rex has a lot of baggage and his personality just isn't one that shows it much on the surface, Pyra and Mithra are in the roles of exploring mental illness through the main character of a Xenogame in Xenoblade 2, while Shulk is probably the one in that role in Xenoblade 1, so of course he's more likely to be heavily affected by another major traumatic event happening to him later in life. Even if the origin slander is untrue and he did actually work on it, which I think is pretty likely to be the intent of the writers, and I just happened to notice a couple holes in that story, it's also very possible that post-Future Connected, Shulk was laying plans upon plans to prepare for a future Fog Beast invasion, and when he did all of that, and possibly did some things to help stop the intersection from being a calamity, and then Ionios happened anyway, he'd be very hard on himself and end up in this kind of state too. Ultimately, I think the dirtiest thing you can do to Future Redeemed Shulk is directly compare him to Rex in every possible way, because, well, they're completely different kinds of character who serve different roles in their original story and are progressed to Future Redeemed in reasonable and understandable ways from how their characters were when we last saw them. It really just comes down to them having always been two different flavors of shonen protagonist. Rex is a much more aspirational character, while I think Shulk is a much more realistically portrayed character. So I'm not exactly going to get on our Minato boys case when I am absolutely certain if I was put in a similar situation, I would probably be much closer to the Shulk end of the spectrum than the Rex end, and that is if I would be in as good of a state as Shulk is. He can get out of bed in the morning. I don't know if I'd be able to. And this is also Shulk, the guy who gave up godhood to secure a future for everyone where they could make their own choices. After an apocalypse that destroyed two worlds and put what was left under the control of two completely separate tyrannical overlords, yeah, that would shake anyone's self-confidence a bit. Also, there's no shame in needing support or medication to deal with your mental health issues, and I don't know if they were able to invent antidepressants again from scratch in Ionios, so I also think it's reasonable to say that even though they're both tired and battered, Rex is operating at a bit closer to 100% than Shulk is during the entire expansion. All that being said, yeah, they really shouldn't have done all those things where they accidentally implied he's much less competent at his engineering job than he really is, but realistically, he's nowhere near as washed as the slander might lead you to believe. And if you don't like the direction his character was taken in, I hope I was at least able to give you understanding, if not appreciation. There's a good chance we'll never see Shulk in canon again, and if we do, it's going to be a much different Shulk because he's going to be in a much different context than Ionios. But the real lesson to take away from all this is probably one to writers both of Xenoblade and aspiring. If you're gonna have a major character return after a time skip in a later entry where they're not the main focus, you should probably check and see stuff that was going on over that time skip and in the present that they'd reasonably be involved in given their connections, personality, skills, and knowledge and all that. And if you don't want them to have been involved, at least write an explanation for why they weren't involved, so you don't accidentally do what Future Redeemed did and portray someone as accomplished as Shulk as a washed-up old has-been, who made his protege and then later his son do all the engineering work for him. Until next time though, this is Luxon, signing off.